Howdy, everyone. This is Larry Stein with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and today we want to talk about watermelons and also some other melons. Not only are we going to give you a brief lesson in how they are grown, but we're also going to show you how to select that optimum watermelon for your awesome 4th of July celebration. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to show you a PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to talk about watermelons. And then at the end, what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to select a watermelon for your July 4th celebration. I never cease to be amazed at how creative certain people can be. Here's a situation where they had a glut of watermelons coming on, couldn't get them sold, and so they resorted to a creative aspect where they actually carved these watermelons into flowers. And so here you are seeing a finished product. Here you are seeing the detail of the carving. Note that the flesh is not totally ripe, and so this is a situation where they were going to lose the melons, and they came in and created flowers out of them, and they were able to still sell them instead of losing money on this particular situation. It's amazing how much time and detail goes into such a process like this. Now realize watermelons are hot weather plants. They like it hot. They're also originated in Africa, and they need a lot of room. And so when you associate a plant with Africa, you think of hot and dry. And so that's when they thrive, but also they serve as water storage. You know, a watermelon is 90+% water, the fruit is, and so you could use a watermelon as a water source when you're trying to cross the desert, etc. Watermelons are in the cucurbit family, meaning pollination is absolutely critical. And we also want to talk about diploid versus triploid watermelons. Now, we told you watermelons need a lot of space, and that's true, but they are developing smaller varieties. Rather than the fruit averaging 10 to 30 pounds, we now have some 5 to 8 pound melons, small melons. And in this situation, we're growing up as opposed to out. And so we've actually supported the melons. And so that can be a possibility. One of the biggest challenges we have with growing watermelons in Texas today is bacterial fruit blotch, which is what you're looking at right here. And so when a grower buys a lot of seed from a seed company, that grower has to sign a waiver that they will not sue the seed company if they end up with a bit of bacterial fruit blotch in their seed selection in their plants that they have. The big question that everybody often has is, where do you get a seedless watermelon? How can you have a seedless watermelon? If it has no seed, how can you plant a seed? Well, what you need to realize happens is they take a regular watermelon here, like a Jubilee or a Charleston Gray or a Royal Sweet, and they treat it with a chemical called colchicine. And that colchicine doubles the chromosome number of the watermelon. So whereas before these were 2N, these are now 4N. And so when you cross a 4N with a 2N, you get a 3N or a triploid seedless watermelon. Now, we don't call them seedless anymore because you can often have a black seed or two, but most often you have all those rudimentary seed. You know, the seed don't develop, but you have to have those seed there because those rudimentary seed produce the hormones to allow the flesh to develop. And so that's what we're looking at in that particular case. So here is a triploid seedless watermelon. Notice it's all hard here, you know, just all flesh. So realize when you have no seeds, the shipping of the melon is greatly increased. Because when you ship a large melon that has a large seed, as the melon vibrates, it kind of messes up the flesh around those particular seeds. Typically, triploid seed cost about $1/4 a piece. And so most situations when people grow seedless watermelons, they grow or have transplants grown. And so they go to the field having a plant for every spot in the field as opposed to planting seed and getting a limited stand. We like to transplant these plants when they have their first set of true leaves. This plant is actually grown a bit and it's a lot larger than we would like to have. Notice also the yellow cast of the plant, meaning it's kind of hungry, needs a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer. Here would be a better scenario where you have the first set of true leaves, and so that would be the ideal transplanting size. A lot of these folks employ and engage these large transplanters, which is a mechanical unit, and you still have to have folks dropping the plants, but realize you can plant several acres in a day. Going through a field, you see the packer wheels here, they pack the plant in. Notice it has its first set of true leaves, so that is the ideal stage to plant these things. Note we have a cover crop that was planted in between and killed. And so this allows these plants to grab on to those plants in the field, meaning that the wind is not going to whip them around. And so that helps those plants get off to a really, really good start. Again, cotyledon leaves, first true set of leaves, and that's the ideal size to transplant them. Now, ideally, if you're going to do watermelons on a small scale basis, you would plant them on plastic mulch. You would have the plastic mulch down and you would plant on top of that plastic mulch. So here you're looking at plants growing on mulch. Here you're looking at plants growing on bare soil, and you see the great difference in growth there. And so plastic mulch warms up the soil, holds moisture, keeps weeds down, and really allows these plants to grow off and get off to a good start. Again, you notice how advanced these plants on plastic mulch are over these on the bare soil over here. Another situation, these plants are almost double in size compared to these soil plants that are grown on just bare soil. Now, the other thing you need to know about watermelons is they're a cucurbit. Pollination is ultra critical. You have to have insects to do this job. The best pollinators are typically honeybees, and usually you need, for every 10 female flowers, when you walk down the row and you come across 10 female flowers, for every 10 female flowers you see in the bee, in the patch, you ought to have one honeybee out there. If you have one bee for every 10 female flowers, then you have enough pollination and you will be off to a good start. Typically, this equates to about 1/2 to 1 colony per acre, and you want to get these bees in before you see the crown flowers. The crown flowers is where you get your good set and big tonnage from, and usually you only need the bees in the field about 2 to 3 weeks. So here is a strong hive of bees. You see we have a lot of bees right here, and so they're going to work the flowers really, really well. Here we have a mass of foliage, and notice the bee boxes at the end of the field over here. Typically you put them on every other side, and the bees crisscross the field and pollinate the crops efficiently. The other thing you need to realize about pollination is this is a male flower right here. There's no little fruit right here. And this happens to be a female fruit. There's a little watermelon right here. Now a bee has to visit this flower, the male, and transfer the pollen to the female flower. And the other thing is the bee has to visit this flower at least 15 times. If the bee does not visit it sufficient times, the melon is not going to get sufficiently pollinated, and it's going to be misshapen, and that creates a real situation. Now here, this is the triploid vine here. The melons are not getting pollinated very well. And so this thing is gone into growing a gorilla vine. And so that can be a problem. If you're going to plant triploid watermelons, you need to make sure that you have adequate pollination to do the job, because if you don't, the triploid plants won't set and they become gorilla vines. For the most part, you will only ever find one fruit set at each node where they set. In this particular situation, this is one of those freaks of nature, as it set 2 watermelons at one particular node. Here are the fruit right here, the developing fruit. You see we have the foliage right here to cover the fruit and keep it from sunburning. And so that's ultra critical when you grow watermelons, that you have sufficient foliage that you can cover the melons themselves to prevent sunburn. Now, weed control can be an issue in watermelons, but realize there's grass-only herbicides that you can use over the top. In this situation, we've used Select or Post over the top, and so it's killing out the grass, but the watermelons still look really, really good. Water is going to be a key element of growing watermelons. We would think the best system is to grow raised beds covered with plastic and have a drip tube underneath that plastic. But realize there's a lot of dry land acres in Texas. There's also a lot of acres that are sprinkler irrigated. And as long as you manage the water so that the foliage dries by evening time, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with using overhead irrigation to water the watermelons. Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service has had a statewide watermelon variety trial for the last 30 plus years. And in this trial, we evaluate watermelon varieties from any seed company which wishes to submit their entry. Typically, we do 3 reps of each variety, and we actually come in and harvest the melons, and we come up with yield as well as fruit quality. And so, like I said, we've been doing that for numerous years and have evaluated a lot of quality watermelons. The big challenge that most people have when they try to grow watermelons is, well, how do you know the watermelon is right? And really, there's several different ways. One is there's a tendril that's opposite the fruit. And when this tendril turns brown, usually that's a sign that the melon is getting ripe. The other thing is, if you turn the watermelon over, the ground spot, the area that contacts the ground will be a creamy color. And so if it's green to white, it hasn't matured sufficiently. The other thing is the width of the stripes. If the stripes are narrow and hadn't fully developed, then we know it's not right. And so typically we use a lot of these same signs. You know, we check the tendril, we check the ground spot, we check the size of the stripes. The other thing is days after planting. And then at last resort, we may come in and thump them. And a little bit later on, we're going to show you how to thump watermelons. And if indeed you can tell if a watermelon is ripe by thumping. Obviously, these watermelons have to be gotten out of the field, and so it's labor to do that. In most cases, they harvest them in trailers. Here's a bus, creative situation to getting them out of the field. Here's a field situation where we have late season fungus problems come in, typically anthracnose. And so you can lose a lot of melons to sunburn if you're not careful about that. So we need to be aware of that. Here's a situation where the watermelons did not get pollinated. And so you just have vigorous full vines. And so they're not going to make many watermelons because of that particular challenge. These melons are graded and typically put in boxes and shipped to the stores. And notice the watermelons are cleaned off. You see the ground color spot there. It's the creamy color, we knowing it's ripe. Others are loaded into semis and then sorted when they get to the other end. So we're going to talk about selecting a quality watermelon a little bit later on. But what we want to do now is talk a little bit about some of the other melons that we have. The main one we're going to talk about is cantaloupe. Actually, we don't grow cantaloupe in Texas. We grow muskmelon. True cantaloupes are warty. They have no net or oblong. Typically with muskmelons, we have net and musky flavors. Again, it is a cucurbit. Pollination is critical. Poor flavor, a lot of people talk about poor flavor on muskmelons, and they want to blame water. Typically, the reason for that is either too much water or not enough sun. We need to be aware of disease, mildew, and we'll talk about when to harvest them when they slip. Realize that when you harvest watermelons and or muskmelons, they do not increase in sugar content. And so you want to harvest them at their maximum sweetness if at all possible. Cantaloupe, like watermelon, is a very drought tolerant crop. You see it's pretty dry in this particular field situation. And typically when you have that, the fruit quality can be quite good. Cantaloupes, muskmelons will grow in higher pH soil, heavier soil. This is some Houston black clay, and as long as you're on raised beds and keep the water away from the plants, they will do just fine. The key is to grow a nice amount of foliage. The foliage is going to produce the food that will allow the fruit to get sweeter. Notice the bee here pollinating this particular flower, getting pollen. This could be a male flower, and this again could be a female flower down here. Here we're showing you the little female flower. This is the flower, and that's the little fruit. And again, the bees have to visit this flower at least 15 times in order for that fruit to be set and do extremely well. In this situation, you see the little fruit is withering up and dying, meaning that we did not have enough visits by the bee to pollinate that particular fruit. Here you see the fruit has been pollinated and the flower has fallen off. And so that's the situation that we're looking at. Again, bees are critical to get a crown set on these cantaloupe plants. You see we have 4 fruit set right here on the crown. That's where you get your best set, your best yield, best quality fruit. And so the ideal way to do that is to have sufficient bee population early in the season. Notice that cantaloupe, muskmelon are a climbing plant as well, and you can crawl up spaces. A lot of people think you need to support these melons, but actually the plant will support it. The fruit will hang on the vine until it actually gets ripe itself. Here one, you see it's starting to get ripe, and eventually that fruit will literally upsize from the plant. And one of the challenges we have is the later you get in the season, you can have aphids, you can have fungus get on these vines, and so you will need to be able to protect them late season to keep your leaves so that you will have good fruit quality. Here we're showing aphids getting on those. Not so hard to control, it's just that they get underneath the leaves, and that can be a challenge. Here again, we have combination of aphid damage, anthracnose, other issues causing the leaf loss. And realize when we have the leaf loss on some of these different melon types, then the fruit quality is not going to be very good. And that's where we fail to develop sugar in the fruit. Ideally, when you buy a muskmelon cantaloupe, you want this stem end to have sized from the plant. So here is a cantaloupe that we have harvested, and this fruit was literally cut off or pulled off the plant. The ideal situation is to have that stem literally slip off the melon itself. And when it slips off, then we know that melon has developed optimum sugar content and is of the best quality to consume. And so the real key with watermelons and cantaloupes is that you realize that they're hot weather crops. They like well-drained soil. Adequate pollination is absolutely critical to these things. And so a bee has to visit one flower at least 15 times in order for those things to adequately pollinate. So the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to actually show you some fruit. We'll show you a couple of watermelons. We'll talk about how you select a really high quality one, as well as cantaloupe, and we'll show you in the next segment.